Why do you need a third party to tell you what's good if you can sit there and think about what's good to society?
Okay, when I think about what's good, I'm convinced good is good. If I love and respect him, that's good. If I hate him, that is evil. But I struggle at times with hating people, honestly. I struggle at times with not being self-absorbed. It's a struggle for me. It just doesn't come naturally. So that's why I need Christ. That's why I need to
Just say, oh, I fly. And then you don't believe me. Then what do? I wrote it in a book. I flew.
Great. Well, if you go to the top of the library, jump off and fly to that building over there, I'll believe that you fly. But if you jump off that building and splatter all over the cement, I'm going to know you don't fly.
If I get 100 people to say that I flew, then would you believe me? But you weren't there. If I got 1,000 people to say that I flew, would you believe me if I wasn't there?
That would definitely give you more credibility. But no, I would ask, what are these people gaining by saying that they saw you fly? Have you simply deceived them in some magical way?
What if everyone's purpose is just to deceive you? So I get 10,000 people, and they're all their purpose is just to deceive you, to tell you that I fly. But to you, I'm credible because I got eyewitnesses.
Eyewitnesses can get you thrown into prison.
Yeah.
Not many of them, right? But I can promise you, if you told me that you flew on your own, unaided by an airplane or a parachute or whatever, I would be skeptical, but I'd be open to saying, okay, what's the evidence? How many people think that you, Shad, have flown?
Well, no, none. But I don't have the sources right now. But I'm saying hypothetically, if I got 10,000 people to say that I flew, would you believe that I flew?
Shad, I think it's very dangerous to try and live in the hypothetical world.
Prove hypothetical.
So right about now, I got to make a decision. Is he hypothetically here, or is he physically, literally here? And if he's physically, literally here, my fist better stop right there. See, I don't live in this hypothetical world that says, well, hypothetically, he might be a dream I'm having right now. So therefore, I can just keep swinging. No, the overwhelming evidence is he is standing here. That's why my fist better stop here.
Yeah, you can't see Jesus Christ. I mean, you didn't know that he was revived from the dead. You're just getting that from account witnesses written in the Bible.
I never saw George Washington. I never saw Napoleon. I never saw Plato or Socrates. But historical knowledge written by eyewitnesses is a credible form of knowledge. That's why you have a history department here at UConn. Because historical knowledge, which has nothing to do with repeatability, we don't get Washington back and get him inaugurated first president of the United States every fall so that all you UConn students can say, oh, I get it. Washington really was a first president of the United States because he just was inaugurated in my classroom. No. Instead, you study eyewitness documents, American history, and you come to understand our first president was George Washington.
I'm not arguing that Jesus Christ wasn't real. So you can admit, I'm not arguing that George Washington isn't real. But I'm if all the accounts on George Washington was real, I would disagree about that. I'm sure there's something about George Washington that documented accounts got wrong.
Good.
That's not real.
Legends grew up around George Washington. Therefore, we better learn how to distinguish between historical narrative and legend. And they are different. Very different.
If you choose, why do you choose this one? Why not the Book of Mormon? Why not the Korah? Why not why do you choose this? Why this? Why is this one right and everything else wrong?
Because when you read about Joseph Smith, who started the Mormon Church, and when you read about his claims, there is so much internal contradiction.
I could say the same thing about your work.
Good. Then give me one example of how Christ contradicted himself.
Infinite things. Hold
Good.
on.
Well, I'm going to be out here for a few hours today, so why don't you go find your contradiction of Christ and bring it out here? You can't accept the contradictions of Joseph Smith, but you do insist, although you don't have an example right now, that Christ contradicted himself.
I'm working on it.
Okay, good. Keep working. Be an open-minded thinker.
Can God be seen by man? In John 4:12, or however you pronounce it, no one has ever seen God. In Timothy 6:16, no man has seen or can see God. But then there's also the story of Abraham seeing God. That's one example. There's also a lot of examples with incest of contradictions. How are some contradictions just context and some just diametrically opposed to what other books say?
Okay, what does it mean When I say that I have seen God in the first century and saw Jesus, I saw God in human form. But no one has ever seen the Father.
Like, how do you decide what parts of the Bible you follow? Like, different, like, rules that you follow through the Bible. Like, if you're, I don't know the exact quote or whatever, but there's a whole thing about how, like, if your brother dies with a wife, you must implant your seed in her to have the children or something like that. I can find the actual writing. But, like, what do you decide is real and what's just a metaphor of life?
If you can't answer that question, you will flunk out of this place. You will flunk your English class and you'll flunk your biology class.
But you're using the book as a scientific explanation for what...
No, I am not. There is no
So you're saying...
science in the Bible. Let's all say it together.
So...
There is no science in the Bible. That is why, if anybody says to you, science contradicts the Bible, they either haven't read the Bible or they don't know what science is.
There's nothing behind it. Why should I believe it?
Why should you believe the Bible?
Sure. Why is this specific writing with very little physical evidence from the past something I should accept as true?
Archaeology supports the names of places, the names of Roman rulers listed in the New Testament, because archaeology supports the Pool of Bethesda, the Pool of Siloam.
Some of these people might have existed, but there's no evidence that shows the parts of the Bible that are like give the power and that like are above human.
Oh my goodness. You can't scientifically prove God. Why? Because God is not a physical object. God is a spiritual being. Therefore, science has no answer to the question, does God exist or not? Because science only deals with what you can observe and repeat. And if you can't observe it, and if you can't repeat it, it ain't science. But guess what? If you tell me that the only way you can know truth is through science, you are naive, gullible, and ignorant.
Then I'm all of those things. Why
all right, you are.
That's not science. What?
Prove to me that he has a rational mind. Scientifically prove it.
You can look at you can look at a CAT scan, look at his brain, and use the information from that to determine...
Hey, you don't know that's a brain. It's mush between his two ears. You know very well why you accept he has a rational mind. Because look how he's dressed. Listen to him speak in an articulate fashion. That articulate speech of his doesn't come about by chance. It shows me that there's a rational mind between his two handsome ears. Similarly, I can't grab hold of God, put God in a test tube and say, oh, now I've proven that God exists. That's impossible, because God is not a physical being.
The difference between a person at a college campus who's dressed whatever, you can assume he has a rational mind, versus there's an all-knowing being that's lives in the sky that is like has made everything. There's much bigger jump than just someone has a rational mind.
That's right. You can't see God, therefore God doesn't exist.
That's not my line of thinking.
I can't see his mind.
There was
It
no
doesn't mean his mind doesn't exist. I got to look for other evidence.
There's no proof of him. All you have is this one book, and there's books that say a ton of You don't trust all that.
I don't believe in God, that God exists, because the book tells me.
Why do you attribute it to him, though?
Because if there is no God, love, meaning, and morality are a crapshoot. They're all relative. You create them in your head, because if there is no mind prior to the human mind, then who creates right and wrong? We do.
So are you saying...
If there is no mind prior to the human mind, who creates love? We do. Which means love and meaning and morality are totally relative depending upon which mind you're talking to.
But where I kind of like lose it is in a lot of just the verse of the Bible. There's a ton of stuff that just is just wrong, and just like an example I was looking at was the idea that or just like partially out of date but partially just like morally wrong. And so like there's the whole thing about like go and sleep with your brother's widow in the duty of a brother-in-law to keep your brother's line alive, but Onan knew that the child would not be his own, so whenever he slept with his brother's widow, he spilled his semen on the ground, blah, 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 blah. And so my whole thing is, like, I agree with the core idea of be a good person, all that, but I just think that the Bible, and there's a bunch of other religions that have those similar ideas of being a good person, but where I don't get with the Bible is there's so much in it that has either been like said, well, you can't take that part literally, or this isn't it doesn't actually mean that, or that like there's stuff in it that still is slowly becoming less socially accepted as morally correct. So why is you drawing drawing from the Bible when a lot of the Bible, the core idea is, but the details are getting fuzzy?
Well, so from an atheist perspective, I'm going to answer your question. Why did I hear you say, this is good, this is not good, this is moral, this is not moral, this is ethical, this is not ethical? From an atheistic perspective, it's all morally relative. So how can you stand here and say, this is moral and this is not immoral, this is ethical and this is not ethical?
I think the idea of morality, and that morality is drawn from God or religion or whatever, right? And atheists aren't going around killing people, they have moral, and they don't necessarily believe in a higher being or an afterlife that is drawing you to be more moral.
Right.
Or like animals, there's certain societal structures that are built up through multiple species and different religious groups and all that are more just biological and like, I don't know what the word is, but just like apes react very similar to humans, and we found there's a lot of like evolutionary similarities, but they don't go to church, they don't believe in necessarily that we know of at least a God. So like, why is there that connection?
Well, I see evolutionary theory is all raised red in tooth and claw. It's all about the strong eating the weak. So to pull a type of moral goodness and beauty and your desire for love from evolution, that is a serious stretch.
There's parallels in how...
Yes, there's parallels.
So, but then...
Altruism, some of altruism, yes, agreed.
So then, what? And back to my more like original question of like, the Bible has all these things that have either been revised or said, oh, in the translations it's changed.
Right.
Whatever. Why does the Bible is being referred back to when there's just the basic idea of be a good person, do good things, and that is kind of what I feel like religion should be more centrally based on? Why is the Bible... Why should I believe that the parts of the Bible as well build on top of that?
Okay, so I would start with the Gospels. Even secular would say he was a historical figure.
Yes.
Okay, what were his teachings like? Were they the teachings of a madman or somebody who could potentially be God? What was his lifestyle like? His own family and even the Roman soldiers at one point fell down by his teachings and lifestyle. I don't think, just like Bono said of U2, I don't think a schizophrenic who would claim to be God, as a therapist I see people claim to be God who are schizophrenic, sadly, he would be in that camp. Do you think a schizophrenic could change 34% of the world? Unlikely, potentially. Yeah. And so starting there is important, bro. I wouldn't hop to, is there a talking snake? Or Jonah in the belly of a whale? Because this is way closer, and there's way more historical documentation here. But more to your point, I'm getting there. I keep hearing you talking about religion. Cliffe would never say religion brings about this, and somehow religious people are better than atheist people. No, it's about, is there a transcendent source that says this is objectively good, this is objectively evil? And if you have no transcendent, moral, obligatory source to say that, then it's all just, your truth is your truth. My truth is mine. If there is tremendous evil out there, whether it's the abuse of an innocent child, or whether it's the abuse of a puppy by letting its tail on fire, I can say from my perspective, well, that's not really wrong. I don't really like it, but that's not evil or anything like that. While you could say, no, that's tremendously evil. So lastly, and more pointedly to your point, yes, there are difficult passages in the Old Testament. Totally agree. Yeah. We were with this atheist, very big atheist on his podcast yesterday, who was a secular Jew, who kept pushing this on us. But I would always go back to Matthew chapter 19, where no longer, Jesus says about Moses' law, can you give a spouse a certificate of divorce. So no longer is marriage just contractual, where it's, you know what, you're kind of in my way, I'm going to divorce you right now. No, Jesus says now it's all about sacrificing for your spouse, and you have to stay together unless there's adultery, desertion, or abuse. And so he's tightening the noose. Yes, he's moving with culture and making things more humane, absolutely. But he jives with culture in such a way where it's an ancient Near Eastern brutish culture. And so absolutely some of the laws are brutish and he fits with the culture, and yet the Israelites are always more humane. They're always a step ahead. For example, when it comes to the tough part of slavery, if you are to captive, Leviticus talks about, if you are to capture a human being and enslave them, you're to be put to death.
Yeah. Wouldn't a lot of that just come with like social structures and the fact that society would fall apart without these social structures? Like drawing that from like the morality, how much of it is morality and how much of it is the idea that if like eye for an eye, everyone goes around killing each other, society will fall in maintaining and preserving society versus the idea of morals.
the fabric of the universe, you better jive with it. And if you don't, imprisonment's going to happen. All kinds of family breakdown is going to happen if we live selfish lives. But if there is no God, I agree with you. Atheists, and so would Dostoevsky, atheists can still be good people. That's not the weight of his argument. The weight of his argument when he says, if you do not believe in God, do whatever you want, he's saying there's no moral obligation. Or maybe someone a little more recent. Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer, who cannibalized as well. He put it perfectly on his CBS News, from his jail cell. CBS News, when they went in and they interviewed him, he said, oh yeah, I was just killing and eating people because it jived with my own desires, and we live in a godless society, so there's no moral objectivity. Okay, that's a serial killer who's eating people, and he understands it more than the typical atheist understands morality.
But I feel like that's taking it to an extreme.
All the top atheist philosophers take it to an extreme in the sense of they're trying to get you to think, and they're saying, be consistent. That's why Nietzsche went to the point of saying, I really despise my atheist friends who are living for compassion, love, sacrificing for another. That does not jive with atheism at all. They're being inconsistent.
All of what you guys are saying is going back to like, okay, well, don't take it so literally. It's more this idea, and you're personally drawing that from the Bible and not the actual word itself, while also talking about the historical backing, but also expanding and drawing meaning from something that you're using as a I'm not articulating it well, but
I never turn to the Bible to answer the question, does God exist?
yes.
The Bible, for me, has nothing to do with that question. But the second question, who is Jesus Christ? Well, obviously the Bible, the New Testament, has everything to do with that. Why? Because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the historical eyewitness accounts of how Jesus lived, what he taught, how he died, and how he rose from the dead. And no, I don't want you to go walking into some church that has a picture of Jesus, who has blonde hair and blue eyes and is carrying an American flag, because that ain't the real Jesus. And I don't want you to go to some place that's going to talk to you about how Jesus was a Republican or that he was a Democrat. False. Jesus was not a Republican or a Democrat. So what do I want you to do? Be honest intellectually. Go to the source documents. Now, if it's Muhammad, you go to the Quran. You don't go to the Bible, you go to the Quran. And if it's Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, you don't go to the Bible, you go to the teachings of Buddha. And if it's Jesus Christ, you go to the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, read them for yourself, and ask yourself, does the evidence point to Christ being reliable or not?
Using the Bible to, because it's out of date, using it to, well, what would he have thought? Or what would, all that. I feel like it's just, it's become taking on a whole new life outside of the original text.
I was at Harvard, and a student stepped out of the crowd and said, you Christians, you got it all real simple and easy. All right? All you got to do every time you make a difficult ethical decision is go running to your magical book, the Bible, and there God tells you what to do. And I said, sir, you got to be kidding me. My wife and I are building a house right now. In light of the fact that people are starving to death today, and we have the solution for starvation. Money, buy food, feed starving people. How much money should we put into our house, and how much should we give away to starving people? And if you think I go running to my magical book, the Bible, and there God tells me whether to buy a Kenmore or a Westinghouse dishwasher, you're out to lunch. I have to struggle existentially, ethically through the issue. How much money should I keep for myself, invest in my house, and how much should I give away to feed starving children? The vast majority of ethical decisions are not answered directly by the Bible. Now, there are principles, yes. Love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbors yourself. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Whoa, that's difficult stuff. Attacking racism with a parable of the Good Samaritan. As a Samaritan gets down on his hands and knees and cleans out the cuts and bandages the wounds of a Jew. So yes, the basic principles are there, but then we got to flesh life out in the nitty-gritty of everyday life. And that requires prayer. It requires a relationship with Christ. because the Bible's not going to answer all those questions specifically.
All right, well, I'm just going to say, I feel like I've talked way too much.
No, you have
what I'll
not.
say-
I like you.
All right, so what I'll say is, I think I've realized through this conversation that we agree on more than I thought we would.
All right.
But I'll let other people talk, so thank you.
All right, but I have a request.
Yes.
Let somebody else talk, but then you hop right back in.
I got class.
All right, you bet, man. Go to class, but
Thank you.
maybe we'll see you tomorrow.
How are you able to read the Bible and know that your interpretation is correct?
You have to have a great deal of humility and to acknowledge my interpretation could be wrong.
No matter like how you put it, like so many people will try to humble themselves and have humility when reading the Bible and putting it in context.
Right.
Different interpretations will come up
Yes.
and disagreements will come along, and that's how like the different denominations
Right.
came along.
Yeah.
So how can you make certain that yours is correct? And
What I can do with you is explain why I interpret the way I do, and then if you disagree with me, I will challenge you in the same way that you will challenge me to read more accurately, to interpret more precisely. But bottom line is, you make your decision, you got to make up your life, I make my decision, I got to make up my life. And I got a ton of friends who say, Cliff, you're misinterpreting the Gospels. Jesus is not God. He's a good teacher. And I say, I'm sorry, there is no way that I can read the Gospels and see how by both his words and his actions, Jesus claims to be God, and conclude, oh no, he was just a good teacher. It's impossible for me. That would be intellectual suicide. The same way I cannot read the Quran and say, oh, Muhammad really thought Jesus was God in human form. That's my interpretation. No, that's a false interpretation. Muhammad made it very clear, Jesus is not God. Now, I respect him. I've got to read that honestly, and then I got to decide, is he accurate or not?
but then what about the Orthodox Church Fathers?
No. The Orthodox Church Fathers did not put together the Bible. No, sir. From Rome, Italy, down through Antioch, Jerusalem, down to Alexandria, Egypt, it was the worldwide church that agreed what books would be included in the New Testament canon and what would be excluded. So no church fathers made that decision. They were part of it, but there was no council that decided we're going to accept these books, we're going to reject those. That was a decision by the worldwide church. In fact, that was one of the criteria that had to be met by these books, that it was accepted universally, not just by the church in Alexandria or the church in Antioch or the church in Ephesus.
But can you go to heaven without believing directly in God? Because I don't know. Whenever I would learn, you have to put all your belief in, but you can't believe in something that you don't already believe in. If you go back to your example before, you could believe he's like not real, but I messed up my car. You don't have to.
Sorry,
Give me a
take your
minute.
time.
I'm
Okay.
doing a bad job of explaining this. You can't make yourself believe in something. You know
Can't
what I mean?
make yourself believe in something.
If you don't-
Correct, I agree.
So if you were born and raised not believing in God,
Yeah.
how are you supposed to transition into becoming a believer?
Are you trying to maintain that you believe today everything that you were taught as a little kid?
No.
Good. So you don't have to believe what mommy and daddy taught you. You have a mind, you have a will, which is a free will, and you decide what you believe.
But if you have any doubt, you don't go to heaven?
No. I have doubt all the time. Everybody has doubts. Nobody can prove God or prove Christ. I sure can't. So I struggle with doubts regularly. The question is, what do you do with your doubts? Do you let your doubts harden into unbelief? Or do you allow your doubts to motivate you to more closely examine Christ, the evidence? Are you willing to doubt your doubts? I have far too many people who say to me, Cliff, I can't believe because I doubt. And I say, you're wrong, sir. We all have doubts. I got doubts. I can't prove to you that God exists. I can't prove to you that Christ rose from the dead. The evidence is God exists. The evidence is that Jesus rose from the dead. But I can't prove any of that, so I struggle with doubt.
If you trust that what God is saying is true and you follow his guidelines, then is that more important than the actual belief?
When you read the Gospels, you'll notice Christ called people to believe in him, not it. He called people to himself. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Me, not it. So first of all, faith in Christ is personal trust in Him. Then, if my faith is sincere and genuine, yes, I will seek to obey Him.
Why didn't God ever show himself before Jesus?
Well, God did show himself, actually, in many ways, more vividly before Jesus. You talk to Moses, the patriarchs. Yes, God had to turn his back to them because he was a holy God. And if they actually saw him physically, his face, because he was so holy and good and they're so sinful and broken, they would be judged in a way where they just couldn't handle it, right? So he appears in a theophany. Simply a theophany is he appears in different forms. So a pillar, a cloud once, a strong wind once, a fire once, an earthquake once, the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3 once. So there's all kinds of encounters, and people actually hear the voice of God in the Old Testament. But you're right, in the sense of you and me right now, that's Jesus Christ. He actually was
Like a
physical being. And so that's why, though, the patriarchs and even Rahab, the Gentile prostitute, Hebrews chapter 11, they're going to be in heaven even though they never met Jesus. Because they encountered God, they believed in God. They took that step of humility and said, I am not God, money's not God, my nation is not God. But no, there's a God out there. So that's why Romans chapter 1 and 2, Paul says, and so as Descartes said it later on, nobody is without excuse. There's no excuse to not believe in God because the beauty and creativity of nature and because our moral conscience within, and that's the objective morality piece that we said. And so lastly, I believe that Jesus Christ came at the exact right time in terms of the Roman Empire, Palestine, Israel, Jerusalem, in terms of the growth of trade routes, in terms of the growth of literacy. Everything exploded right when he came on the scene 2,000 years ago. So I find that very interesting. Some people say, well, why didn't he come today? You know, him and Elon Musk could really work well together. Elon Musk could be a trillionaire in 2027, right? Well, maybe he could have used Elon Musk in a different kind of way. So we don't ultimately know, but I believe historically it made a lot of sense why he came when he did.
In yourself, fighting in your own head about what's morally right, and that would be you finding your own moral compass. So I don't really understand why, you say it comes from God, but then you can then go and then have that own personal struggle with yourself. What's the difference?
A conscience is an innate moral indicator. Every atheist friend of mine has a conscience. Every atheist friend of mine says to abuse an innocent child is evil. But you see, they're contradicting themselves when they use the word evil. What they should say is, the abuse of an innocent child is subjectively wrong from my perspective. But if my perspective changes later on today, that's cool. It just is. See, and I'm convinced what I'm trying to do with my atheist friends is say, you might tell me, he's a beast. He's a beast. He's a beast. Just animals evolved to a higher order. But then, if I watch them get ripped off, if I watch them get murdered, I'm going to reel back with moral outrage and say, that was evil. The guy who ripped them off, who murdered them, did evil. You see, you can't live out the view. Morality is relative, no God, we're all beasts. No, when you see an innocent child get hurt and abused, you don't say, oh well, I had hamburger, we ate a cow for lunch, and now the kid got abused today, and it's just like eating hamburger. Nothing wrong with it. No, innately you know it is wrong. Well, where does that come from, guys? Or it comes from your culture. No, if it just comes from your culture, it's culturally relative, depending on which culture you come from. So that's the first point. The second point is, yes, when I put my faith in Christ, the Holy Spirit begins to sensitize my conscience, but I still have a sinful nature. And I still can be a self-absorbed idiot, which means I can wake up every morning and think a lot about how to help me. You know what my challenge is? To wake up in the morning and think how I can help you, my wife, my children. That's the challenge for me.
So why do you need a third party to tell you what's good if you can sit there and think about what's good to society?
Okay, when I think about what's good, I'm convinced good is good. If I love and respect him, that's good. If I hate him, that is evil. But I struggle at times with hating people, honestly. I struggle at times with not being self-absorbed. It's a struggle for me. It just doesn't come naturally. So that's why I need Christ. That's why I need to surrender to him and allow his Holy Spirit to change me. Naturally, I'll use you. Naturally, I will manipulate him, and naturally, I'll step on them if it'll help me get ahead. And Christ says no. And if you think deeply enough, you realize Jesus ain't blowing smoke, he's speaking the truth. But do I still have a free will? Oh, I sure do. And I lose my temper as a 70-year-old guy who's been fighting my anger and my temper for a lot of years. I still lose my temper. I'm embarrassed to tell you that, but it's the truth. And if I didn't tell you that, I'd be lying to you.
So then why do you feel the need to take it to a third party? If we're all born with something in us that can tell us, hey, maybe this isn't good, maybe this isn't bad, why do you then put it on this third party to tell you how to live your life? I feel like we all are capable of looking at each other and saying, I wouldn't want him to treat me like that. I'm not going to treat him like that. Why do you need someone else to come in and tell you how to live?
Okay, good. I don't need someone else to come in and tell me how to live. Instead, I need forgiveness for doing what I know is wrong. And secondly, I need help. I need help to change because I'm one stubborn dude with a lot of bad habits. And what Jesus Christ comes to do is to forgive me for the wrong that I've done and to give me the strength to change.
So, again, what does that have to do with my crutch on my moral compass?
Oh, that's a totally separate issue. That issue has to do with, like it or not, you got a conscience. If your conscience does not tie you into moral absolutes, your conscience is just a fantasy. But if your conscience ties you into real justice versus injustice, real good versus real evil, then there's got to be some type of God, some type of intelligent mind who creates these values, who gives you a conscience, and you with your conscience can understand the difference between right and wrong, justice and injustice. So God is not a crutch for that question. Rather, God is the best rational explanation for why you have a conscience that convicts you. The abuse of an innocent child is not relatively wrong. It's absolutely wrong.
Seems that you almost answered my question naturally when you said that death would be my crutch. I mean, yeah, that's...
No, death is not your crutch.
But that's what you just said.
No, it is not. You're not listening, sir. No, you're not. I said death forces you to find a crutch. That's what I said, sir. Death is not the crutch. But reality forces you and me to find crutches.
Why can't death be the crutch?
Because you have no choice about whether you're going to die or not.
Exactly.
You're going to die. And so now as a thinking human being, you're going to struggle through, good gracious, is there a solution? Is there a way to beat death? Or is death the final story?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at it as in like we all have limited time here.
Yeah.
You want to be treated how you want to be. You want to treat other people how you want to be treated.
Yeah.
I think you can build a very strong moral compass off that idea that you have limited time, and in that time you want to do good things for the people around you.
Good, wonderful, bravo.
So why do you?
But you're going to have the intellectual honesty to acknowledge that the best life that I'm going to build is not the best life. It's just one option because everything's relative. So please don't tell me that it's best to respect people. Don't tell me it's best to forgive. Don't tell me it's best to feed the hungry. Instead, say, there are many options, and I can choose any one of them. But because there is no God, there is no moral absolute, which means if your definition of best is to be Mother Teresa, bravo. But if my definition of being best is to be Adolf Hitler II, bravo. You're not right, I'm not wrong, I'm not right, you're not wrong. There is no right and wrong, guys. It's all a crapshoot. Life is meaningless. Why? Because your birth is an accident, your death is an accident. So obviously, guys, the only thing that lies between those two accidents is you, me. We're accidents. Are you following?
Yeah, something. I don't agree, but yeah.
Well, what don't you agree with?
Because I don't see why. I mean, you're saying exactly what my view is, but then you turn to God at the end. I don't understand why you can't just sit here and say,
no,
we're all in this together. We all have limited time. We're all trying to have the best experience we can.
Yeah.
Through that, we can treat the other people around us how we want to be treated. And
yeah, you could do that.
I would even make the argument that a lot of people who do go through your viewpoint don't do good things to the world.
I agree.
Let's take a flip through the history book.
I agree.
All the genocides that Christianity has caused.
No. Not all the genocides of Christianity. Give me one.
The colonists coming over,
who?
the colonists coming over with manifest destination, all the people who lived here before them, they told them that.
You think
it was
all the
God.
colonists were committed to Christ and that's why they wiped out Native Americans?
What is manifest destiny?
Manifest destiny has nothing to do with the Bible. Manifest destiny has a lot to do with Western civilization. Just in case you haven't figured it out, Western civilization is not following Jesus Christ.
I'm pretty sure the people who committed manifest destiny said it was God's word, and that's why, like, it was God's reasoning.
Yeah.
God gave them permission to go
Yeah.
do that, take that land.
And
Right?
many
So-
Christians had slaves. Doesn't mean they're following Christ when they had slaves. Well, if you read the Bible seriously, you'll realize that slavery is wrong. Many hypocritical Christians, you're absolutely correct. Subjecting people in the name of Christianity is not following Christ. I don't think you have to be a Bible scholar to know that. Just read the Gospels. Jesus didn't go around calling for racial superiority, for colonization. Westerners did, yes.
Right.
Many of those Westerners called themselves Christians. And so people do horrible things in the name of Christ. Tells you nothing about Christ, tells you a lot about those people.
Right, and I think it tells you a lot about religion, and it starts to beg the question.
No, it does not.
What happens when you have two people, right, in a situation, they both think the opposite side of the coin, but they're both telling them that their God is telling them that's the right thing. What do? You have two people and their God's telling them that that's right.
You do something very simple. If you're a Muslim and you're telling me that God has told you to go out and slaughter innocent people, I'm going to say, really, where in the Quran does it tell you to go out and slaughter innocent people? It doesn't. Okay? Similarly, if you call yourself a Christian and you say, and I'm going to have slaves, I'm going to ask you, really, where does the Bible tell you to have slaves? It doesn't.
Sure, I mean, that's one example, but then we could go to examples where God told me that this is my land, and all these people who have lived here for hundreds of years before me, well, I can do whatever I want to because God told me this is my land.
And what's that
mean, we see
called?
that
It's called
going on right now
hypocrisy.
today.
Yeah. And if I say I love Jesus and I hate him, do you know what I am?
Hypocrite.
That is correct. Thank you. I'm a hypocrite. Because you know very well, even though you've not studied the New Testament extensively, that for me to say I love God and I hate him is flagrant hypocrisy.
Right, so I would make the argument that a lot of Christians
Are
in history
hypocrites.
are hypocrites. So
Thank you.
Why would I subscribe myself
Very good.
to a religion which seems to breed a lot of hypocrite, hateful people?
Do you
Why-
think I'm standing out here saying put your faith in Christians?
No.
No. Do you think I'm standing out here saying put your faith in the church? No. Instead, I'm saying read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, examine Jesus Christ, and if you find the evidence is that Christ is reliable, put your faith in him, not in Christians, not in the church, not in Western civilization, not in colonization, but in Jesus Christ. And if anybody tells you Jesus was a Republican, or if they tell you Jesus was a Democrat, say bye-bye, you're wrong. Jesus was not a Republican, and Jesus was not a Democrat. And Jesus did not talk about the kingdom of America. He talked about the kingdom of God. So let's be honest. And if this guy comes up to me and says, all I need to know about Islam is 9/11, I'm going to say you're a narrow-minded bigot. You don't find out about Muhammad by looking at 9/11. You find out about Muhammad, honestly, intellectually, by reading the Quran. What did Muhammad teach? How did Muhammad treat people? What do you think, Stuart?
Well, if you're going to go by your reasoning too, 200 million people have been killed in the name of atheism just in the last 150 years, whether it's Pol Pot, whether it's Mao, whether it's Hitler, whether it's Stalin. So never go by numerically speaking, because I believe there's a lot of great atheists. Just because 200 million have been slaughtered in the name of atheism and materialism and scientism doesn't mean that atheism is wrong. It could be hypocritical. But I would look, what happened this past week was something pretty gigantic. You know what happened this last week? One of, if not the most famous atheist in the world right now, who wrote The God Delusion, sold millions and millions, Richard Dawkins. How many people have heard of Richard Dawkins? Good amount? Yeah, all right. So just this past week, he said, you know what? I still hate Christianity, but I'm going to admit I'm a cultural Christian. I'm a cultural Christian. And so it's fascinating to hear you out here keep talking about morality and how we need this third party, and that's how we get our morality, when Richard Dawkins himself just came out of the closet saying that, no, we atheists, and he was speaking for a large band of atheists, let me tell you, he was saying we've been acted fully by Judeo-Christian values. You're just swimming in a pond right now that was created by Judeo-Christian values: compassion, love, sacrifice, human rights. Why were hospitals built? Why was the slave trade ended? Judeo-Christian rights, not by Greek thought. Plato, Aristotle, I can promise you, that has not formed your ethical system. So you're living by a third party and just don't even know it. Nietzsche himself said that. He said, if you're living out self-sacrificial, compassionate values, you claim to be an atheist or agnostic, but you're really just a Christian and don't even know it.
When Jesus died on the cross, it was his human nature, not his divine.
No, it's both.
Both that died.
Yep, fully man and God until through death. Fully man and God.
So how do you reconcile that with a verse where it says that God cannot die if both his divine and human nature die?
Where does it say that?
Where does it say what?
That. You just said a verse.
Which one?
You just say, how do you reconcile that with a verse? Am I wrong? You just said that, right?
Which verse are you talking about? I said 2 verses.
What's the verse? Read it.
I don't have. That's not the verses I have are for the second part. The first question was about the.
If you're gonna stand out here and proclaim that loudly, I want to hear the verse you're talking about, because people do that all the time. They come in here and they'll say, "Hey, this verse says so and so." I would never do that to the Quran, the Vedas and Upanishads, the Bible. I wouldn't do it with any of it. So if you're gonna come and make that clear proclamation that Jesus cannot die or a God cannot die if it's human and God, I want to read that verse clearly. I want to hear it crystal clearly.
1 Timothy 6:16, God is the only one who never dies.
God is the only one who never dies. So that is clearly pointing to the God of the universe who clearly can never die.
And is Jesus God?
And so Jesus is one of the Trinity, yes, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And did Jesus ultimately die and be resurrected? No, he was resurrected as well, right?
So you have to die to be resurrected. You know?
Yes, he did die, absolutely, but God the Father never died.
Okay.
So the implication is, can God die and stay dead, correct? But it's a good question because you're exactly right. Jesus did pass away. He did not just swoon, he really died.
Okay, it's because I heard a different answer before. Someone said that it was his human nature that died, but his divine half is what continued to exist.
Okay, that's a great point too, because Gnosticism came about in about 200 AD, and that's what the Gnostics really espoused. They tried to get rid of his physical body and just have his spirit and knowledge.
So let me read to you in Matthew 7, verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me that on that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? I think that's pretty straightforward, those 3 things. And I will declare to them, I never knew you, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Is this talking about, I'm not saying this is for all Christians, but is it talking about some group of Christians, some people in Christianity? Or is he talking about people from other religions claiming that Jesus is God? Is he talking about the people that are around him, yeah?
Well, right. He's talking about, so some of you who say.
Yes.
And he'll say, I never knew you.
Yes.
So the implication is, it's those who say, I follow Christ.
Yes.
I'm close with Christ, and I have eternal
Who say that?
salvation.
Who say that?
Well, he doesn't specifically say, but even some of his disciples, even some of those closest to him, Judas Iscariot.
Yes.
He was prophesying. He was doing as many miracles as the other disciples were, and yet what happened to him?
He ended up dying in 2 different ways, which is contradictory, by the way, how he died.
That's not true. The suicide, it's not contradictory. But we can get to that later. But that is a matter of, right there, it's not about works. That Matthew 7 passage, just like Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats, it all shows that, hey, you can do all kinds of things in my name. You can give away half your possessions in my name and still not have eternal salvation because it's a heart issue. Am I responding to his grace first and foremost and then living out of gratitude to him those works and those deeds? Do you see how he's doing that?
Okay.
See, that's very different from any other. Every single religion would be anti that.
And so what you're saying is that like a God created the eye for a human to see out of, right?
Yes?
So God created a really complex thing, this eye, right?
Yeah.
Is God complicated?
In one sense, yes, but in another sense, no.
If God is complicated, as you just said, who created God?
Oh, that's easy. The idea someone created God is idolatry. Because Jesus clearly insists nobody created God. God doesn't have a beginning.
Hold hold up here. You're saying the eye can't just magically pop into being.
That's right.
God had to create the eye. So who created God then?
God didn't pop into being. God has always existed. God is eternal. God did not pop into being.
The human eye,
Yep.
you're saying, was created by something.
No. If you think what I'm saying the human eye is not eternal. The human eye has a beginning. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. The human eye had a beginning, therefore the human eye has a cause. God does not have a beginning. God is eternal. Therefore, God does not need a cause.
How do we know that God's eternal? It didn't have a beginning.
Good question. The reason that I do is because it's the most reasonable answer to the question, what is
The
eternal?
answer is not proof of something.
That is absolutely correct. You're absolutely right. I cannot prove God. And I can't prove that I'm not just a bad dream you're having right now. Maybe I'm a bad dream you're having right now, right?
Under that logic, there's no evidence, though. This is just
Oh, there's tons of evidence. Does order and design point to an intelligent mind? Absolutely yes. Do moral absolutes point to a moral lawgiver? Absolutely yes. Does your longing for meaning and purpose in life point to reality being bigger than just matter and energy? But your insatiable longing for meaning points us to the fact that, by gollies, there's more to reality than just matter and energy. You thirst for meaning. Every single stinking one of you do. Every human being on the planet does.
then promote the existence of a meaning. You can thirst for something that doesn't exist.
But in light of the universality of the human longing for meaning,
Within the human population, there's vast variation in our desire for meaning. It is not.
but we still long for meaning. Every Buddhist, every Hindu, every Muslim, every atheist friend of mine,
You're making an
thirst for
absolute
meaning.
statement. There is a human being who exists who does not long for meaning.
good, fine, agreed. So what?
You made an absolute statement. Oh,
No, I did not.
You said universality.
I'm sorry, what I meant by universality is around the world, you will find the majority of people long for meaning. You're absolutely correct. I'm sure there's some people, especially those committing suicide, who I respect a lot. If they're committing suicide because they're acknowledging the meaninglessness of life, then they're just like Albert Camus, who said, the only question modern man must answer is, why not commit suicide? Because life is a crapshoot. It's an accident. No meaning, no purpose. So just end it, man.
Why not just stop the movie?
Good.
Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais came up with that. That point you just made right there, the movie, yeah.
Why not just stop the movie?
Good. So why haven't you stopped your movie?
Because it's interesting to watch.
Oh, so you're
Doesn't
suddenly
mean there's
attaching
meaning
value
to
to it.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, you are.
Your longing for meaning doesn't mean there is meaning.
No, that's right. It doesn't absolutely mean that. But it's a piece of evidence that points to the fact I am not just a pile of chemicals. I have a soul. I have a rational mind. I have a free will. I have this longing to understand why. Why do I live the way I live? What is my purpose? Is there no purpose to life? In other words, you can't live out your moral relativism. You can't live out the meaninglessness of life because you have a conscience, a rational mind. And down deep you know that to denigrate a woman or a man is evil. Don't do it. But that's not just because you're an enlightened white guy who happens to go to a fine American university campus. Rubbish to that elitism. It's because you're a human being created in the image of God with a conscience, a rational mind, and you know that to denigrate people is really evil.
Why do people denigrate other people? Okay, what does God say about owning slaves?
You want to kidnap somebody? Sell them? Or keep them in your possession? Death penalty for you. Exodus 21, verse 16.
Why
That's
don't
right.
we have slavery here?
Okay.
If we're deriving our morality from God,
Yep.
and God says, hey, here's a slave, it's fine.
No, he doesn't say fine. Instead, what he's saying is, don't join Spartacus and lead a slave revolt. Instead, realize that you're living in a perverse, corrupt world, and so slaves, honor your masters. Then you study slavery in the first century Roman Empire. It usually was referring to an indentured servant. Doctors and lawyers were slaves in first century Roman culture. So remember that. It's not dealing with, he's not addressing the chattel slavery in America. Not at all. And guess what he also says? He says, sir, if you get married and your wife commits adultery, before God you can divorce her. Not meaning by that divorce is good, but meaning by that, if your wife commits adultery before God, you can divorce her because she has severed the marriage bond. That is not a recommendation of divorce. In the same way, when Peter writes, slaves, honor your masters, that is not a recommendation of slavery, but is a statement how you are to live in a culture, in a society where slavery is embraced. Stuart, what do you think about slavery?
Yeah, I think Paul especially, more so than Christ even, set the grounds up out of Galatians 3:28, mainly, for slavery to not exist, but it had to be progressive. This slave rebellion would have been squashed immediately. And so for Jesus Christ, Philippians chapter 2, one of the earliest creeds in all of the New Testament, Jesus Christ came as a slave. So you have to deal with, okay, why was it that William Wilberforce and so many others were able and wanting to abolish slavery, not just in Europe, but also here in the US? They were all motivated by their Christian faith to say nobody should own somebody else, and especially they attacked the race-based form of slavery. That in the Bible, the word doulos actually means servant.
No, go ahead.
And so those who were actually...
Hold up, I have a question.
All right, redhead. Yeah, similar redhead. I like redhead, so you go right ahead.
Don't call me redhead. Okay, so you're saying that these Christians, they didn't like slavery, right?
They did not like slavery
not like
because
slavery.
all
Hold up,
people are created
I'm asking
equal.
questions here. Please let me talk. Thank you. So,
You've been talking a lot. I just entered the circle. So let me talk as well, right?
Christians are saying, hey, we don't like slavery, let's abolish it, right?
Even Frederick Douglass himself was an abolitionist who was motivated by his Christianity, despite his racist white slave owner who used the Bible incorrectly, he said, to keep him within slavery. Go read Frederick Douglass, please, or Martin Luther King Jr. Let's keep.
Was there ever a point in time in which Christians used their Christianity to like slaves?
Absolutely. There was a point in time, too, that Christians were...
So Christians used their Christianity to form a moral basis to say that slavery was good and fine. And then later...
Nope.
Reviewed that moral claim that slavery was good and that came from the Bible.
Absolutely
and
not.
said, hey, this isn't true?
Absolutely not.
Well, if it's not
go
true,
read
then
go read Mark Knoll, and he wrote the book The Civil War as a Theological Crisis. And he, in that book, along with many other historians, no, I'm not going to hold up. You keep telling me to hold up. You keep talking. Stop talking and let me actually answer the question. Mark Knoll was the one who specifically said, if you look historically into slavery, it was not a matter of a theological basis for why the South actually enslaved people. It was financial. There was almost nobody who actually looked at the Bible and said, oh yeah, Jesus is out here telling me to go whip a slave. I have never met anybody, by the way, and I've talked to a lot of Christians who actually think the Bible was ever condoning slavery.
And you earlier stated that this slave owner used his Christianity to endorse slavery, right?
Correct.
And that was a twisted
twisted scripture,
of
exactly.
Christianity, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, so if it's a twisted pervasion of Christianity, you're saying that this perfect moral guideline can be utilized for the immoral?
Anything can be weaponized. I could be buttering my bread with a knife and stick it in you. The Bible can be weaponized just like a knife. Does that make sense?
We want you to keep talking.
No, I just answered your question.
Okay.
The Humanist Manifesto can be weaponized as well. Easily. The Humanist Manifesto came out of an atheist conference that meets annually, which oddly enough, every single country that's represented is Western and white. Just like you, my friend. And so why is it that 99% of atheists at all these conferences seem to be white and male? I think it's because they're largely ethnocentric. And largely, atheism is based off of a type of thinking that is really based off of pride. So that would be my short response. I agree with a lot of what you said, and it sounds like I answered your question well because I didn't hear a response, and now you're riding off into the sunset. And I'm glad you asked it though, because you're right. Any book or anything can be weaponized. Does not discount it though for what its proper use.